Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Hey, this episode is also brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, Bet Online is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from football to NBA, college basketball, our specialty, to the NHL and UCF. Bet Online is the number one sports betting source for the new year. From touchdowns to three-pointers and hat tricks, BetOnline has you covered every game, every play, every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. Hey, and welcome back to episode 2 of NETtlen, the Sunbelt basketball podcast. It's a little bit of a spinoff from the Fun Belt podcast, all part of the Believe Network. Here, talk a little bit more about, I guess it's technically the third week of Sunbelt play, but it kind of feels like the second week because there was a little bit of break in between. But we've had some surprises so far, I think. South Alabama getting off to a really hot start was a little bit of a surprise. And then maybe even more of a surprise was Old Dominion going to Mobile and pulling off the win there after South Alabama was really just blowing everybody out. So to talk a little bit about the Monarchs and what they're doing under Mike Jones in his first year, I've got Harry Minium from ODU Sports here, longtime, well-known Virginia sports writer who moved into working for ODU, a few years ago. So nobody really knows ODU any better than Harry. So we're going to talk a little bit about just what's happening with the Monarchs. Harry, it's good to have you in here. Are you surprised by the start for ODU so far in conference play after what they did in non-conference?
Stunned, not surprised, stunned. Now I'm going to write a column that's going to run tomorrow that says, hey, it's still early January. There's a lot of basketball to play, but let's look where this team was a few weeks ago. They lost at Arizona 102-44. They defeated mighty UMES, Maryland Eastern Shore, 73-71. Maryland Eastern Shore has played 19 games and hasn't beaten a Division I team yet. They lost a couple of non-conference games at home and were 3-8. And then they go to ULM and they weren't playing with a lot of confidence, and things were down, and they won 80-75 in overtime. And things just began to click for them. Then they came home and they beat Virginia Wesleyan in a Division III game. And beating a Division III team is not a big deal, but everyone got to play. Their self-confidence got better, and they lost to Arkansas State. Pretty good. Arkansas State pounded them pretty good. They didn't lose their confidence. They won at home against Southern Miss. They won at Louisiana, and admittedly, Louisiana is, with an interim coach and a couple of players lost, they're not as good as they should be right now. But then winning at South Alabama, outscoring them 7-0 in overtime. And Sean Dewar-Gordon, 27 points, 18 rebounds. Yes, it's pretty amazing how this team has turned things around. Like I said, it's early, but given how poor their start was and how well they're playing now, it's a big surprise here.
Yeah, and I think, for me, even when they're winning a few of those early conference games, it's like, well, they went to ULM, and Louisiana struggled a lot, and Southern Miss is kind of hit or miss. Sometimes you get a really good showing from them, sometimes you get not great. And it wasn't really until beating South Alabama that I was starting to get convinced that maybe, they've turned things around and, might be a factor in this conference race. And, we saw it a little bit. Georgia Southern last year had, a really bad non-conference start under a first-year head coach. And then they didn't win a ton of conference games, but they suddenly were very competitive. And it seems like, ODU's maybe even taking that to the next level where they beat the team that was really looking like the best team in the conference the first couple of weeks.
Yeah. The thing is, Mike Jones is first-year head coach in college. He'd been an assistant coach 2 years at Maryland, I think, and 2 years at Virginia Tech. I'm not sure. I think 3 years total. he'd been at DeMatha forever. I think 20 years as a head coach. He's an ODU alumnus, and he's not going anywhere. This is his dream job, and he has thrown himself into this. He's put together a good staff, and we went through probably our worst Division I season ever last year. Coach Jeff Jones had a heart attack in Hawaii. The team wasn't playing very well. The team chemistry wasn't very good. We lost a lot of close games, and things fell apart at the end. Kieran Donahue, our interim head coach, did a hell of a job. He really did, keeping that team together. He had to dismiss a player from the team. It was a hard decision, but the right one. This year's team is almost all new. Mike went out and he recruited his tail off, and he got a lot of good players in the transfer portal, which is, of course, in this age of the NIL and everyone being able to transfer every year, is the key to success, especially in a conference like the Sun Belt.
Yeah, and you talk about those transfer players, and obviously, I think Sean Dewar-Gordon was named the Sun Belt Player of the Week earlier today. Has been playing really well as of late, and I think he was one of those guys who, when he committed to ODU, that was a name people were somewhat familiar with, kind of expecting to be one of those main guys. But it takes a little time, doesn't it? Like when you bring in a bunch of new players for everybody to kind of find their role. I mean, we're seeing that at JMU where I cover, like they haven't really gotten there yet.
I think they will. They've got a lot of talent, and JMU has a great coaching staff. And every time Old Dominion plays JMU, it's a huge game for us. It's funny when when both teams joined the Sun Belt, all of a sudden, what was a decent rivalry all of a sudden became hate on both sides, if you know what I mean. So, but yeah, I mean, he, like Robert Davis Jr., he came from UMass. Robert Davis Jr., he's one of the nicest kids I've ever run into. He's averaging 15 points a game. Sean came from Siena. Jaden Johnson, the point guard for ODU, high school kid from Maryland, played at Fork Union last year. He's probably the key to this team. He plays 36 minutes a game, 5 assists, 8.8 points, very steadying influence. And that was really a key because Emo Essien, who was our point guard last year, I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, he had a fainting spell. I think it was at Georgia Southern, and was out for a while. Well, he had another one in the preseason, and his career is over. So, we were without a point guard with any experience except a true freshman, and he's really played well. And one of my favorite players is Caleb Swanton Roger, 6'11" kid or 7-foot kid from Calgary, Canada, played at Maryland. He didn't really play at Maryland. I mean, he hardly got on the court for them. And he's averaging, I think, 5.4 points, 4.3 rebounds, 30 block shots. Got a broken nose the other night. When he plays against JMU next week, and I expect he'll be back by then, maybe not until then, he'll be wearing one of these big nose guards. So really tough kid. And the thing about this team, it reflects Mike Jones's personality. His personality is quiet determination and never give up. And that's what this team has adopted, his personality. They never quit, even when they're down by a lot. So we'll see how it goes. So far it's been a very good season for Old Dominion when you consider we haven't had a lot of good seasons in the last 4 or 5 years. And this is, I think ODU fans are looking at this Sun Belt season with hope, more hope than they've had in a long time.
Yeah. And, you talk about Mike Jones coming in as an ODU alum, and obviously, a beloved one at that. And,
Yes.
I think, as soon as it kind of became clear, it was probably going to be, even before Jeff stepped down and it became clear it was probably going to be his last year, that name was out there as like, an ODU guy who could come back. What was the response? So the response was good when he was hired. What was it like the first few weeks of the season when there were some struggles? Were people kind of still on board, or did he take any heat?
I know JMU fans are going to object to this, but I'm going to say it anyway. And the fact is, we were last in the league last year and led the league in attendance. So we have the best fans in the league. And, he heard it. There were a few boos. There's some jerks in every crowd, but largely the fans have remained supportive here for a long time through a lot of tough seasons. And I've been surprised at how well they've hung in there. Mike has such a great personality. He's a good guy. He doesn't eat a candy bar without praying. That's how religious he is. He's a very deeply religious man. Um, a good story, kind of a heartbreaking story. His wife got cancer. It looked bad. She got experimental treatment and she came back from it. I mean, his story is just exceptionally rich. And no, the fans love him. He's everywhere he goes. People know him. People respond to him. I was at the ODU coaches show last night with both him and Delisha Milton-Jones. The fans love him. And, no one expects us to have a winning season this year. I mean, we could, but no one expected that. I mean, we were, I think, 7-26 last year. No one expected him to come in right away and turn things around. But I think this team has the potential to do that, to finish in the top half of the Sun Belt and maybe make a run in the tournament. We'll see.
Yeah, I agree with you about ODU's fan base and it being the best basketball fan base in the conference. And, one of the best basketball fan bases really in mid-major basketball in general. And I've said really since JMU and ODU and Marshall and Southern Miss, when the league expanded, to me, it was important for the Sun Belt that ODU basketball gets back to where
I remember that column. Yes, that was actually a great column that you wrote back then. You had a lot of the people here, by the way, you were very popular that week at ODU. Wood Selig loved it. Everyone loved it because you're right. When you have a great facility and you have a great fan base, you need to be good for the league to be good. Yeah, and that was a very insightful column for someone who covers an opposing team. You don't see that very often. So,
yeah, and I really believe it. I mean, ODU, that's a team that if the Sun Belt's ever going to get to the point where they consistently could get 2 bids, ODU is going to be one of the teams getting those bids more often than not. I just believe that, when they're getting 4,000, 5,000 a game for a last place team, let's see them fill that place every night when it's, when they're playing for a championship. Like that part of it's important. The market, being one of the largest non-pro markets in the country, like everything's there for ODU to really be successful in basketball. And I think, that's great for everyone in the Sun Belt if ODU gets it turned around, and it looks like they will.
They will eventually, if not completely this year, next year for sure. I know some of the kids he's going to get commitments from. They're going to be really good next year. I also think it's important that Marshall be good. They have a great fan base. They're not in a great market, but I think, and it's very important that JMU be good as well. I mean, all 3 teams have great basketball traditions, and all 3 need to be good and sort of lift the rest of the league up if we can.
Yeah, I mean, especially talk about, facilities and everything else. Like, they really kind of raised the bar in the Sun Belt for basketball when those teams came in. And,
Absolutely.
I said that when those 4 teams were coming in, but they were all coming off down years that year. And some of the, older fan bases, like Louisiana and, some of the ones that have been around for a while kind of scoffed when I said, hey, these teams are going to raise the bar basketball wise because they'd all had bad years the year before. But, there's facilities, there's fan bases, there's everything you need to be pretty successful. And I still say ODU kind of leads the pack in that regard.
Well, certainly in football, I think JMU, Southern Miss, Marshall, and ODU have helped. Now, ODU hasn't been that great the last 2 seasons, but they went to a bowl last season. JMU and Marshall have obviously been very good. Southern Miss is going to be good. I don't know whether you've seen their recruiting in the portal. They've done a hell of a job. I think they're really going to be good next year. So I think that was it helped all 4 schools, but I think the 4 schools helped the Sun Belt more than the schools were helped.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about, ODU's schedule to start Sun Belt play, and that win at ULM, when you get an overtime win on the road, anytime you do that, I think that kind of got to like lift everybody's spirits. But then to do it again at South Alabama against a really good team, just how much confidence are they playing with right now compared to 3 or 4 weeks ago?
I mean, 3 or 4 weeks ago, they didn't have a lot of confidence. The ULM game, I was talking with Odell Hodge yesterday, the former ODU star. He played with Mike Jones at ODU. He's the assistant to the head coach. I think 6'8" center, 6'9", and he was all everything for ODU. I asked him. I said, "When did things turn around?" He said, "The ULM game when we won on the road and we screwed up at the end of the game and yet won it in overtime. That's when things began to click. We were 1-0 in the league, and guys said, oh, they began to believe in themselves." And it's just tough. You bring all these kids. I think he had 19 or 20 guys on his roster when the season began. I mean, he's lost at least one since. When you have all these guys and you don't know how good all these players are, you're trying different combinations. There's really not enough time to get together and figure out who you are, until a month or two or sometimes 3 into the season. I think they're just beginning to created identity. One of their biggest problems has been, shot selection has not always been great, but that's kind of Mike's philosophy. If you're open, take a good and you think it's a good shot, take it. But their defense hasn't been as good as Mike wants it to be. And I think that's something that he's looking on to improve. I mean, we all know that in the NCAA tournament and, in Sun Belt tournaments, defense wins games, defense and rebounding. So that's where they have to improve.
Yeah. And, one thing that's been really impressive to me too is they've done this recently, mostly without Devin Caesar, who last year kind of really came on late in the season, after some roster shakeups there. He found his role. What's it say that, they may get a guy like that back and just add even more offensive firepower to this team?
He has missed 6 games, I believe. He's going to miss at least a couple more. He's not worked out since mid-December. I would say they're not going to get him back until February. So, I mean, he'll help, that's for sure, if he's back in basketball shape. But
yeah,
I don't know what his injury was. Mike doesn't talk about what individual injuries are, and I don't ask because I don't want people from the media to ask me. So, but whatever it is, he's not been able to work out until now. So.
Yeah, you know us media types too well that we will.
Of course, it's your job.
Yeah,
it's your job to ask.
Yeah. Anybody else? You mentioned a couple of guys, those transfers and everything. Is there anybody else that's kind of really stood out or surprised you, or has kind of taken it to the next level here during this? I don't want to say winning streak because they did lose to Arkansas State, but it's been a good couple weeks.
Stephon Walker. Transfer from Robert Moore, 6.5 points, 7.4 rebounds. He's really stepped up and played well. And Danny Pounds with Caleb on the bench. Danny really stepped it up against South Alabama. He's not played a lot this year. His shot selection hasn't been great. He hasn't been playing great. But coach put him in against South Alabama, and he played really well. And that's something they need. Another guy inside who can pound it and play defense and put the ball in the hole when they need it. I mean, he could be a very key contributor the second half of the season if he continues to play with discipline and hard as he did against South Alabama. That's the thing about it. South Alabama, I'm sure they had just come off a win off Arkansas State, big win for them. Old Dominion was kind of out physical them and out hustled them, which is you didn't expect to see. So we'll see. They've got a couple of games this weekend and a couple of home games next week. I think 2 weeks from now we'll know a whole lot more about ODU.
Yeah. Let's shift gears over to the women's side where ODU is also 4-1 and right there in the mix for Sun Belt Championship. It's early for them too, but it looked like one of the teams that could really compete for this league. And right now it's really bunched up at the top. And
yes, it is.
Those top 4 and especially the top 2 seeds in the conference tournament are going to be huge. Some big games coming up.
That's absolutely correct. The Sun Belt seeding it's merciless. If you finish like in the middle or bottom of the pack, you've got to win 3, 4, 5 games. But I don't know whether the people listening to this know, but basically, if you're 1 through 4, you play 2 games. I think, or is it 1 through 2? You play 2 games and you're in the championship.
The top 2 seeds go straight to the semifinals.
Yes,
and the top 4 are going to the quarterfinals. So it's a big advantage.
Well, that gives a lot of value to the regular season. And I think I think basketball coaches don't like it because if they finish 10th, 11th, or 12th, their odds of winning the tournament are not good. I think it's good for the league. You want your best team in the tournament if you can, so that your best team can win. That's that. I kind of like the way the conference did it. The thing about the women is, every year, Delisha Milton-Jones, Hall of Famer, former Player of the Year at the University of Florida, Georgia native, great story. She drowned and was declared dead when she was a child, and they revived her at the hospital. She's got an amazing life story. Every year she goes out and gets 8 or 10, 12 new players, and she's gotten a lot of new players this year. There's almost too much scoring talent on this team. I mean, you got a lot of people who can shoot. Of course, the key for any Old Dominion women's team under Delisha is defense. And at times their defense has been lacking. The effort has not, though. I really like their chemistry. Good kids on that team, humble kids. They play hard on the court. They're hard-nosed on the court. They're physical. India Buford, their leading scorer, she scored 8 points, had 3 rebounds, and a key inbounds pass that led to a basket in the final 3 minutes in their last win. Oh, gosh, I've forgotten who they beat. I'm old, so I forget things like that. Their only loss to Coastal Carolina, that game could have gone either way. They probably should have beaten Coastal. I thought they outplayed them, but they had some tough calls that night. That happens sometimes. You get calls against you. Like, I'll give you, for instance, India Buford stole the ball, went down and did this. And here's Delisha and her tired bench saying, timeout, timeout, and timeout. And here the rest, they go like this, jump ball. So, things like that happen. If that had been ODU's ball, I think ODU would have won. But that, stuff like that happens. So you got to overcome that.
Yeah.
This is a really good team. I can't wait until they play JMU. It's always a good game when the women play each other.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about kind of the history and everything on the men's side. Like, on the women's side, if those two programs can be as good as they can be, that rivalry was something fierce. Like, back in the early 2000s and before that, like when both of those teams
when they were in the CAA. Yes.
Yeah. And ODU's obviously got a long, long history of women's basketball, but there was a time when those were both, top 25 programs.
Yes.
That would be huge for the league if we could get to that point again, especially when you're talking about, and on the women's side now, you're getting paid for winning NCAA tournament games.
Yeah, it is getting tougher and tougher for schools in the Sun Belt to compete with the Power Fives.
Yeah.
But I think in women's basketball, we have a chance because there's money being paid in women's basketball, but it's not like football, where if you're a group of 5 football team and a Power 5 team wants one of your players, they're going to outbid you. You can't outbid them. So you have to rely on guys, who just love your program and don't mind giving up money to stay. And there are not a lot of players who are doing that in this day and age. The changes in college athletics are disturbing right now. And I'm hoping at some point someone will put on the brakes and then begin to reverse it just a little bit. Unlimited transfers, I think that's a little bit too much, but that's just me. I'm an old guy. I'm old school. So,
yeah, they've got to figure out a way to do it. And I think to pass muster with the courts, they're probably going to have to get players in to negotiate these changes. But something's got to change.
They need U.S. Congress to step in, and I don't see any chance of that happening. They bicker over what time to start each day of Congress. They bicker over everything, but the only way this will ever get fixed is if Congress passes a law setting here are the parameters, and we need a salary cap. I mean, the NFL has a salary cap, there has to be some kind of salary cap. And there has to be a limit on transfers. Unlimited transfers, it's I know the courts view this as that's players' right, but the coaches in universities also have a right. It's $40,000 or $50,000 for a scholarship. Teams pour a lot of coaches' time, trainers' time into you, and then you just leave. So, I mean, I understand if you've graduated, you can leave, or you can leave. I think if you leave once or twice, that's okay. But for people to be able to leave every year, I'm just not in favor of that. Maybe I will be one day, but not now. So,
yeah, I could see a day where maybe when you sign with the program, you're signing for either 2 or 4 years, and that's what you're under contract for, and that's what they know they're going to get. And but it's probably all going to be sorted out by people who maybe people in Congress, it may be lawyers, who knows, but hopefully something gets sorted out before too long.
yeah.
Hey, well, Harry, I really appreciate you jumping on here, telling us all about the Monarchs.
Sure.
I think we learned a little bit about both teams, and we'll probably have more to talk about because it's looking like it could be a good Sun Belt season for both men's and women's basketball at ODU. So,
yeah.
Hey, I appreciate the time, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Shane. I appreciate it.
Harry Minium from ODU Sports. Check out his work on ODU's website. He's always got some interesting columns and stuff up there. Great insight to the Monarchs in all sports, but we're getting deep into basketball season now. And that ODU team, what they're doing, they kind of put the fun in the Fun Belt with this hot start, but also kind of one of the maddening things about Sun Belt basketball so far this year is, a team like that, brand new coach, a lot of new players, everything's kind of new. And so it's predictable that they're going to have a slow start, but they go, and like Harry said, they get blown out by a couple of high major teams. And, a win's a win, a loss is a loss, but in the net rankings, the score does matter a little bit, and you get blown out in those games. You squeak by a Maryland Eastern Shore team that's not very good, to say the least, but you get the win at home. And in the end, what matters to a lot of these coaches and players and fans and teams and everything is that you win that game. And especially early in the season, a win is a win, but not in the net ranking. So we see a ODU program sink, all the way to the 340s of the net towards the bottom of the entire Division One. But we know they have some capability to do better than that. And, what happens is they go and they beat, a rising South Alabama team on the road. They get that conference victory, and, things happen in conference play. Teams are going to beat each other in conference play. We say it all the time, but, you see that, and South Alabama, which had been kind of the darling of the net rankings for the Sun Belt, takes a huge dip. They're out of the top 100 now. So it's not great for the conference as a whole, but in the big picture, this year in particular, the Sun Belt was not going to really be in the conversation for, 2 bids or anything like that. And so to a certain degree, it doesn't really matter what any of these teams are ranked in the net. You just want a fun, entertaining conference tournament, come March, and, maybe see a team that has a chance to pull off an upset, win the thing. But it does kind of, show you, it ends up being a kind of perfect encapsulation of what we're seeing in the net era when you look at ODU and South Alabama and that game in particular. But huge victory for the Monarchs, making this conference race really interesting. And impressive that they are getting these victories on the road, because that is very difficult for teams to do. We've seen that time and time again. A Arkansas State, who we thought for a long time was probably going to be the best team in the conference, might still end up being the best team in the conference. You never know. But, they go on the road and they drop a tough one at JMU, a JMU team that cannot buy a road win at this point in the season. Like, they're just a completely different team when they hit the road. So yeah, really congrats to ODU for their start. When you look at it with the win at ULM was a big one for this team, just in terms of kind of turning things around. But at the time, you say, well, ULM it's the one team in the conference that was worse than ODU, at least in the non-conference, when it came to net and KenPom and all of those things. So you put it in the back of your mind when they win that game, but you don't really start to pay attention I don't think, until they get that South Alabama win last week. So, I'll see ODU in person here in a little over a week, I think, is when JMU heads down to Norfolk. And, as I've said before, like, that's a great place to go see a game. If you get a chance, that crowd is fantastic. They're going to be lights out now that, ODU's kind of turned it around a little bit. They lead the conference and tournament. Whatever conference they're in, they lead in attendance pretty much every year. And with Mike Jones there getting things turned around, I think that's definitely going to be the case at ODU for the foreseeable future. And, like Harry said, I think for basketball, it's been pretty important for the league to bring in some of these teams like JMU and ODU, where their facilities are magnificent. If you haven't been to those places, their arenas are extremely nice. They're great size for mid-major basketball. They both seat about 8,500, I think. Great facilities, great practice facilities. Really almost everything in place you need to build a mid-major program, but especially at ODU, that's going to be, big for the conference. If this is a sign of things to come for the Monarchs, because I think they could be really good every year, and then you're always going to have a team like an Arkansas State or a South Alabama or a Southern Miss or a JMU, that App State, that sneaks in some really good years and can be consistently competitive, but really, really good at times. And, if you have a kind of a flagship program that is really good every year, then you start to look at conferences like, the West Coast Conference in their glory days, where Gonzaga is always really good. And then you see a St. Mary's or a San Francisco where somebody sneak in and look really good too. And, all of a sudden those teams are great. The Missouri Valley has been like that. Sun Belt's a little bit different because there is football that changes the kind of the dynamic for everybody as far as how much resources go into basketball and stuff. But I think we're going to continue to see the Sun Belt get better at basketball, even though this is a little bit of a down year on the whole. And if we're looking for encouraging signs, I really do think the week that ODU had is an encouraging sign for Sun Belt basketball in general. We'll get more into that in future weeks, future episodes. We'll get into every other team in the conference, but I really do appreciate Harry coming on and kind of breaking down what ODU has done, because I've really been planning on this being a South Alabama heavy show this week until the Monarchs pulled off that victory. And we'll definitely get a South Alabama guest on in the coming weeks, and we'll try to get into with every team, every program heavy in there. But in the meantime, you've been listening to NETtlen, hosted by me, Shane Metlin, part of the Fun Belt podcast channel, part of the Believe Network. So really looking forward to doing more of these as we get further into the basketball season. But until then, thanks for tuning in.